Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to another great webinar from CPA Academy. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Autumn and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar on Diversity and Inclusion One-on-One, Understanding Neurodiversity. Our presenters today are Jina Etienne and Julie Turney. Before we get started, I wanted to go through some housekeeping items and do some technical checks to make sure everything is working. First, if y'all don't mind going to the GoToWebinar Questions tab on your control panel and letting me know that you can hear my voice and see the title slide. Feel free to also let me know where you're calling in from. Always enjoy reading those. And if you have any technical issues, you can let me know in that Questions tab, and I'll do my best to get to you as quickly as I can. This is also where you can put your questions and comments for our presenters. All right, let me look over here. Who do we have today? I see a bunch of people from Texas, Virginia, Oklahoma, Georgia. We got someone giving a shout out from Idaho and Florida. All right, now that I know that everything is working, let's go through the housekeeping. This webinar qualifies for 1 CPE credit. You earn that credit by staying logged in for 50 minutes and answering the poll questions. We'll have 4 polls, and to earn full credit, you need to answer at least 3 of them. Now, if you're on a mobile device, you might need to click your answer a few times and scroll down to find that submit button. And if you have to log out and log back in for any reason, our system will keep track of your time. I wanted to let you know that we're recording today's webinar, and the archive, along with your credit, will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. Last but not least, we recommend that you download today's presentation materials, which can be found in the Control Panel's Handouts tab. Now that we're all set, let's welcome our first presenter. Jina, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Autumn, and thank you everyone for joining. By the way, I noticed I have a peer from Maryland here, and when I was looking at the places coming through, I thought, wow, I think we have every state in the union represented. So joining me today, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and what is it, understanding it, what is the impact of it. And joining me today is Julie Turney. She's joining us from Barbados, and no, I'm not jealous. She's the founder of a company called HR at Heart Consulting. And she founded that company after a long career in HR where, I guess you'll talk about it later, but she felt burned out because of the emotional impact of supporting people with difficult experiences. And that's actually what inspired her to found her company, so that she can support HR professionals in the way that she would have loved to have been supported when she was in practice. I also discovered that she and I both share 2 dimensions of neurodiversity, and they're the things that when you meet somebody who shares a dimension of yours that is not common, often invisible, it's really powerful and impactful. So I'm so happy to have Julie with us. Julie, thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Hi, Jina. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. Greetings from Barbados. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys today.
So I want to ask everybody the first question, which is why? Why is this topic? Why would you join me on this conversation? Because this is the conversation. This isn't the traditional presentation. So why would you want to have this conversation so publicly?
That's a really good question. I think over the last couple of years throughout my HR career, being someone with a neurodiversity who never declared it in my corporate life, more and more as I interact with HR professionals and other professionals, when I give talks like this, I realize that we're missing a great space and pool of talent that we're really not tapping into because we struggle to understand people who are neurodiverse. And the more and more I research the topic, the more and more I understand when we talk about how do we deal with this war for talent that everyone is talking about. We recognize from the data that is given to us through the World Health Organization that 80% of persons with neurodiversities are unemployed. So you have, even in the US, like a huge number of people who are unemployed, who are qualified for their roles, but unemployed because they don't know how to navigate the world being neurodiverse, and the world doesn't know how to appreciate, receive, understand, hold space.
Incorporate them into
Yes.
mainstream
Yes.
society, would you say? Well, so look, you just jump right into the conversation. Let me move us to the slide just so that we can list the topics. And, you know, you have provided a host of slides. I would encourage our attendees to download them. There's a lot of information there. We may or may not touch on all of them, but these are the things we want to talk about. So like, what is it when you say neurodiversity? What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
And when you talk about how can it be something in the workplace that isn't an impairment, let's call it that. What are the challenges then? So you want to recruit neurodiverse talent. What do you need to be thoughtful of and then support them through that process?
Mm-hmm.
So that's generally the conversation we're planning. And as our attendees know, please drop questions in. I'm actually monitoring the Q&A. And so Julie, if it's okay, I'll send you some questions as we go along. I'll also hold some till the end.
Absolutely.
And then the last thing I want to apologize for in advance is my dog is here and he's snoring. So I will be muting myself. I apologize, but that sound you hear is not me. All right. So you want to start with what is neurodiversity? Can you help us understand that?
Sure. Can we move to the next slide? Beautiful. So when we talk about neurodiversity, a lot of times when I'm having this conversation, I would ask people, what does neurodiverse look like to you? If you had to name someone famous or otherwise that you know who has a neurodiversity, what would it look like? And a lot of times people come up with these two people, Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory and the other young guy from, I cannot remember. This is my neurodiversity at work here. But these two people usually come up. So Dr. Sean Murphy, that's it. And so a lot of times when people think about a neurodiversity, we go straight to either autism and that's it. But what does it really mean? It just means that our brains, the chemical reactions in our brains work a little bit differently to a neuroneutral person. And actually the term neurodiversity was coined by a lady by the name of Judy Singer, who herself is on the autism spectrum. And she uses the word neurodiversity to describe people who have ADHD, autism, dyslexia. These are usually the things that are categorized under neurodiversity. And so that's essentially what it is.
I shared in the introduction that you and I sort of clicked when we were talking about neurodiversity and specifically, if I may share, ADHD.
Yes.
And what I found so powerful about that conversation, and you and I ended up sort of going off onto this tangent because there are so many ways ADHD can affect what we deal with and how we navigate the world every day. I think I shared with you that I read this article in the Washington Post. She was a woman with ADHD who was trying to design a refrigerator to help people not waste as much food. And when I saw that, I thought, that's me. Every time I have to go through and throw out food, I feel like a horrible person because there's so many people who don't have food. And I realized there's a strategy so that you don't forget what's in there. Because we're very visual, at least I am. And so how does that affect people then if we talk about that as one area? Because a lot of people have ADHD.
Yes. I think like for me, when I'm asking people to interpret things for me, because like you, I'm a very visual person. I'm like, what does that look like? Tell me what it looks like in your mind's eye. And so even simple things like if you're explaining something accounting specific to me, I'm like, okay, draw it for me. Tell me paint the picture. What does that really look like? When you're explaining all these things about deficits and moving numbers and how do we do these things? I'm like,
did you mean debits?
Yeah, debits.
Just checking.
I meant debits. Yes. I'm getting tongue-tied here today, so forgive me. Okay. Yeah, so what do these things look like when we're talking about how the organization makes money, how the organization loses money? What are those things that you look like? For me as an HR professional, that's important for me to know as I am building people strategies and creating people experiences. but I want to know what that looks and feels like. So for me, when I'm talking to someone in the finance space, that's the question I ask. What does it look like? Show me it. Paint a picture. And what happens if we go beyond this, or what happens if we go above this? Like, tell me what that looks like. So for someone with ADHD, usually we want visuals.
Yeah.
Which is why I struggle with reading books from end to end, but I have loads of books. I love to read, just not from end to end.
Yeah. No, I get you. And I like them on my iPad because then I can jump in and out of them easily.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, I forgot we have a first polling question, which we should ask, because if we can go ahead and launch that, that would be awesome.
Sure. Poll number 1 is up and running.
So that one is, does your organization recognize and track neurodiversity as a dimension of diversity? And I thought that was a really good question to ask now, Julie, because you were talking about helping organizations navigate this, but that means organizations need to know it's there.
Yes.
So I'm curious to see the responses as they come in. They usually leave the polls open for about a minute so that people have enough opportunity to respond.
Sure.
But
yep, we are just about there. I'll close it down here in about 10 seconds.
I will tell you, Julie, what you said resonates with me because I think in pictures. And so I struggle to articulate my thoughts.
Yes.
Because the thoughts aren't words, and then I struggle to find words. So let's see the responses here.
Yeah.
11% say yes. 37% said no, and almost half said they're not sure. And I tell you, if you were to ask me this question in the organizations I've worked, I would have said I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So then, but your clients either track it, or at least they were aware that this is an area that they need to be thoughtful of.
Yeah, definitely an area that needs to be that we need to be more thoughtful of. Like I said, educating organizations on the importance of attracting and retaining neurodiverse talent is my sweet spot. But educating organizations on the importance of recruiting neurodiverse talent and why is where the education comes. Why are you having this conversation today as people who crunch numbers? Because at the end of the day, you are part of a process that is going to impact how we as HR professionals or as an organization create great people experiences for people who are neurodiverse. And as we're going to get into the conversation a little later, you'll understand when we need budgets for certain things, being educated in this way helps you to understand why HR or your C-suite is asking for the money to fund these things, which may completely make no sense to you initially as finance people, but then hoping that this conversation today will help to give you a little more perspective and clarity.
So I'd like to show this graphic that you provided.
Yeah.
It describes so many different aspects of neurodiversity because you mentioned ADHD,
yes,
dyslexia, and the autism spectrum.
Yes.
But look at all these other dimensions.
Tourette syndrome. And I think a lot of people struggle with interacting with, working with people with Tourette syndrome. But what I love about this diagram is it not only shows you the spectrum of different neurodiversities that exist, but it shows you what is the superpower of each person with this neurodiversity and how having that talent in your organization can really benefit you. So when you look at people with ADHD, notice it says we are creative, we are hyper-focused, and we have a lot of energy and we have a lot of passion. That is our superpower. When we get in that pocket, that sweet spot of just being able to tune in and get our work done, we are beasts. We are unstoppable. There's nothing we can't create. There's nothing we can't do. And what we're able to put on the table at the end of that process that we've gone through to push that work out is going to be better than anything any neurotypical person can put out, because that's what we call people who don't have neurodiversities. They're neurotypical, right? And while they are the majority, small is powerful. What we're able to achieve is huge as neurodiverse talent. But if you look around this diagram and you think about all the things that we are able to achieve as neurodiverse talent, people with dyslexia, visual thinking, creativity, 3D mechanical skills, this one is huge. And this was an education for me because my oldest son has dyslexia, but he has a photographic memory.
Really? Does that mean he remembers everything all the time?
Everything all the time. Everything all the time. And how we discovered it is at the age of 5, we recognize, as we were teaching him to read like from the age of 2. And he always struggled with putting words together and putting numbers in proper sequences. However, if we read a book to him once, he could recite that book. And so we thought he was reading the book, but he wasn't reading the book.
Oh.
And so then we got him tested and we learned that he was dyslexic, but he has a photographic memory and he's excellent with numbers. So very creative, very visual person. So very true to, where the creativity comes.
That's
in
fascinating.
A dyslexic person. Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things I've read about is, and I'm trying to understand more of, is the autism spectrum and how that shows up. Because first of all, many of us have this stereotype view of what autism is. And we hear of it as a person who's closed off and can't connect and communicate. But we know studies of the brain say, no, that brain is quite active.
Quite.
That there are some industries and professions where they can actually be, you use the word superpower.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when you look at right now, a recent study that I read showed that organizations, auditing firms like Ernst & Young, Deloitte, work a lot with people with neurodiverse, on the autism spectrum, neurodiverse brains on the autism spectrum, because they're able to analyze data faster than neurotypical people. As a matter of fact, the study showed that what they're able to produce is 41% greater than what a neurotypical person can produce. And we're seeing also more people like in the analytical space, so like even in the Pentagon, organizations like tech companies, Hewlett Packard, we're seeing a lot more of these organizations create programs to facilitate recruiting persons in the neurodiverse space and creating environments that are conducive to these persons, this talent pipeline, being able to be creative and productive in their spaces. So yeah, there's a lot happening there. And every person who is on the spectrum, and that's why we call it spectrum, right, is not the same. Some people are autistic to the 10th degree, if you want to say, where they really can't relate and interpret, but they can produce work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you have those individual contributor roles where you just give them work and they will get it done. But then you also have people who are on the autism spectrum who can have relationships and relate and understand how to be more sociable than someone who may be higher on the spectrum. But either way, each individual is able to hold a super concentration and has a great memory where they're able to actually produce work that neurotypical people cannot.
All right, I'm not going to say this word right, but Mark made a comment in the Q&A he said, don't forget about the one at the top, Dyscalculia.
Dyscalculia.
Can you tell us what that is?
So dyscalculia It specifically relates to people who are really good with numbers. The word in itself kind of speaks for itself. But
you talked about the representation of people. So it would be dyscalculia, the autism spectrum. I'm guessing ADHD as well.
ADHD, dyslexia.
Dyslexia are in the accounting profession.
Yes.
Because our brains process information in a way that is, I'll say, compatible with,
yes,
or connect better with the work we do. I know for me, I remember when I took my first accounting course, I was dreading it. I mean, I was taking it because I had to, and I got an A, and I asked my professor if it was usually easy, and he laughed. And what he said is that some people get it or they don't. And I didn't know that I got it.
Yeah.
When I learned it, I mapped everything into a picture, and it all fell into place for me.
Yeah.
I've literally done that my entire career. Like, things fall into pictures, and then I'm able to quickly analyze them. And so it's really interesting then to see this chart, because you have creativity up here. And people, if you ask people to describe accountants, creative probably doesn't pop up as a word. But if you ask accountants to describe themselves, we consider ourselves to be very creative.
Yeah.
But this is a phenomenal chart. Thank you. I'm totally keeping it, by the way.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And I just want to add one thing here, Jina, as it relates to mental health as well, because there are lots of classifications under mental health, but I want to speak specifically to when we think about people who have mental health issues who may suffer with things like anxiety. And studies again have shown that most people in the first responders profession, but also including people in the finance space, often suffer with high functioning anxiety. Because remember, you're constantly working towards timelines, tight deadlines, and you do that. Some people plan it well, but most people in that space work and suffer with high functioning anxiety, but you get it done. So it doesn't mean you can't work with it.
Okay, now you've got me thinking, is it a chicken and the egg thing? Do we develop that? No, I mean this genuinely.
Yes.
Do we develop, and you might not know the answer, so I apologize for maybe putting you on the spot, but after a long career in this space where constancy of deadlines, pressures of getting things right, complying with rules that are constantly changing in all aspects of accounting, do we develop this? And therefore, we're not exactly neurodiverse so much as chronically slightly anxious.
Yes.
Or is it, do we diagnose that there's actually a correlation?
So getting diagnosed to see if there's a correlation, I definitely, that's one of the things that I do support my clients with as HR. And I would do the same for anyone else. Like, I think it's important to understand, where do you sit when it comes to your anxiety? And there's a really great book that was written by a lady by the name of Sonia Lane, which talks about understanding anxiety and where you sit, especially in your profession, and whether or not you're functioning as someone who suffers with high anxiety. I cannot remember the name of the book right now, but
can you repeat the name of the author before I forget?
Her name is Sonia Lane Gartside.
Sonia Lane, Lane.
Yeah, Sonai Gartside, Gartside.
Okay. Sonia Lane Gartside.
Yes, and her book is called Workplace Anxiety. So it's like helping you to understand what anxiety is in the workplace, how it shows up for you, and what level of anxiety you are experiencing, if you're high functioning anxiety or if you just have low levels of anxiety. But studies show that most people in the finance space do have high functioning anxiety. So, but you can work with it, but it is something that you're experiencing constantly. And anxiety falls into the poor mental health spectrum. and it is a form of neurodiversity because you can still function with it, is why it sits in the neurodiversity space.
So talking about mental health and wellness is a topic I want to include in the series next year, because there's something. So in my family, I know I might get in trouble. I didn't ask for permission before sharing this, but I'm sharing it anyway. In my family, and you can look up and down the family tree, there is depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know about that is it is actually a brain wiring.
Yes.
So you talk about anxiety, and all of us get anxious. That is not the same thing as having anxiety as a brain wiring thing.
Exactly, because it's what you're experiencing constantly. It's just like there's good stress and there's bad stress, right? There's stress that makes you aware of danger. That's good stress. And there's bad stress, which is where you're just stressed out all the time. Mm-hmm. Anxiety of itself is something that's normal. You're going to have anxious moments in life just because life is so volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah.
So you're going to have those moments anyway, but high functioning anxiety means you're constantly in a state of being anxious because of the kind of work that you do, and you've just found coping mechanisms for it.
So when you talk, then, when we look at this chart, every dimension of neurodiversity here, there are coping mechanisms that people will naturally develop, and there are superpowers for each of these. And when it comes to recruiting, I'm actually going to move us to the next slide in a moment. When we talk about recruiting, then understanding these influences how we recruit. And I heard of an example, it was specific to Microsoft, that one of the ways that they did interviews is they actually asked people to do video games. And they would compete in tournaments and do something, and it showed you their brain skills as opposed to asking them to be verbal.
Yes.
So that was a creative way to interview. And so here on the slide, you say 80% of adults with autism are unemployed.
Yep.
Compared to the general unemployment rate. And you think this is, so if we learn to identify strategies, is that the solution here, or what else can we do?
Yeah, so definitely identifying the strategies is key. And also creating safe spaces. Like, we want to create an organization where the culture is that people feel psychologically safe to declare these things.
To share it.
Yes, to share it, right? I did a talk a couple days ago where we had this similar conversation about, understanding neurodiversity, and do you tell your employer that you are neurodiverse? And I had so many people on that call say, I'm here working with my neurodiversity, but it's a struggle, and I haven't declared it because I don't want my organization to think differently of me. But then there were some people in those pockets that were saying, well, I declared mine, and my organization has really supported me. And I remember reading a tweet. Oh my goodness. I remember reading a tweet recently that I actually snipped to share with you today that really showed is what I'm trying to explain when I'm talking about understanding and appreciating neurodiverse talent. And it was a tweet that a young lady gave, and she was giving an experience about being interviewed for a job. And she declared in the interview that she was neurodiverse and that she had ADHD. And the response of the employer during the interview was, tell us what we can do to support you when we bring you on board. In other words, you're hired, we need you. What can we do to support you? And that tweet blew up on Twitter, and rightly so, because that's the kind of organization that you want to be a part of. That's the kind of organization that you want to have those kind of experiences with, where people actually recognize the value that you bring to the table, and they want to give you the right conditions to be able to work effectively and efficiently while you are existing with this neurodiversity. And what we're seeing is a lot of organizations are not doing that. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And that's why we have this high number of people who are still unemployed with this neurodiversity, specifically called autism, because organizations don't know how to relate to it.
So let's go ahead then and open our second poll. I think this is the one that says, what skills do you believe neurodiverse talent bring to the workplace? You know, we probably already gave away the answer.
Yeah, we did.
So this one's easy for y'all folks. You should be able to do this. While that's open, I'll share a couple of comments.
Sure.
Someone said, 5 generations of anxiety in my family, from great-grandmother to my child. So thank you for sharing that. Can we get the title of that book again? The book was Workplace Anxiety, and the author's name is Sonia Lane. Sonia, Sonai, right?
Yes.
Lane, Lane, Gartside, Gartside. So hopefully that came through. Can I type that in the chat?
Yeah.
Everybody, Autumn.
I can do it.
Yeah, you can type that in the chat. And I'm just about to close poll number 2 here, and I'll share those results with everyone. Looks like 47% said creativity, 31% analytical skills, followed by 14% with empathy, and 8% not sure.
Thank you. So, Julie, while I type that here into the chat, you said something, and I'm hoping you can help clarify this. So, people who have a dimension who are neurodiverse, some will declare it, some won't. Is there a challenge that we have in society that a neurodiversity is actually a disability? And is it a disability, or is it a completely different category?
It is not a disability. So being neurodiverse is not a disability. However, with the exception of autism, and depending on where you are in the spectrum, it could be listed as a disability, depending on what part of the world you're in. So I know for sure, like in the UK, if you're at the height of the spectrum for autism, it is listed as a disability to the point that you could get benefits for it, you could get a carer for it, and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, most of the others are not listed as disabilities. They're just listed as neurodiversities. Because these all come with their different challenges, but they're things, there's either drugs or, like I know for ADHD, there are certain medications that you can take, but for the most part, there are certain coping mechanisms that you can put in place to help you with these things. I think I heard of, or I read of a study sometime back where they showed hypnotherapy works very well for people who suffer from Tourette syndrome. Like, they did a study and it showed that some people with the help of hypnotherapy can be cured from Tourette's. And there are other studies that have shown, based on certain coping mechanisms that you put in place, it can make your neurodiversity more manageable, and how you interpret the world as well.
Excuse me. So understanding all of what you talked about is just another example of why, as organizations work to build out a D&I strategy, first, under the D for diversity, there's so much to understand about this dimension of diversity, neurodiversity.
Yes.
And overcoming the stigma of all of these different dimensions, because you answer the question that it's not a disability, but I think a lot of people perceive it to be.
Yes.
And disability in and of itself, people don't understand. So there's understanding it, which is important for practices and policies and so on. From an inclusion perspective, recognizing how culture impacts and how we evaluate connection, because people will show up differently.
Yeah.
And then belonging. It's just, there's an entire thread across D&I strategy, initiatives that really need to think about this in ways that you don't think about it when you're talking about race. You don't think about these same nuances when you're talking about gender and things like that.
And the funny thing is we should, because neurodiversity comes in all of those spaces. It comes in different races, it comes in different genders, people with different sexualities. Like, they all make up this spectrum that we call diverse and neurodiverse. So we're not like a different breed of people.
Right.
We're all in that space. And it's, if you're going to find ways to include me because of my race, with that comes my neurodiversity, and how do you embrace all of that? When we talk about people bringing their entire human to work, it's all of that, right? It's my race, it's my sexuality, it's my gender, it's my neurodiversity, it's my my body type, everything.
It's the concept of that is intersectionality, and I think it was Kimberly Crenshaw who coined that term back in '89. She's an attorney, and she was using the word to describe how all of those dimensions you talk about, not only are they within us, but they overlap. They overlap and make up who we are. And so you can't separate the dimension from the person.
No.
And so, I mean, it's just an important thing for people to recognize. This diversity work is hard. Actually, it's hard work. It's important work, but it's, I think, a lot more complex. And which is why I love the series. We talk about a lot of different aspects, because there's no single solution.
No.
All right. So I want to move to this next slide, because on this slide, it kind of goes back to, so 800,000 IT jobs need to be filled. And we were just talking about the superpowers in that space for people on the autism spectrum. Is there something special that companies need to do? I know we're talking to a broad accounting audience, but some of the people attending today work in this field, in the field of IT. When you talk about then strategies to support recruiting, can you give us some examples? It doesn't necessarily have to be IT, but.
Right. So one of the things that I always raise with people is, are you asking the same questions? And I think it comes back to that example you gave about Microsoft. When it comes to the interview process, are we changing up our interview process to accommodate the fact that everyone does not interview well? And that means you have to have a measure of flexibility and rigidity as an organization when it comes to recruiting.
Period.
You're not going to always know that someone is neurodiverse, but you can tell by the way a conversation is going that there are certain things you should look for. And so that brings me to the point of educating yourself as an organization on what neurodiverse talent looks like, so that you can make the necessary adjustments and pivot during your interview process to accommodate being able to get the best out of that candidate that is sitting in front of you. And a lot of times people don't do that. We just ask the same questions over and over again and expect to get the same results. But sometimes there's a really great candidate in front of you that you just haven't been able to get everything out of. And in your mind, as a neurotypical person, you think that person was difficult. That person was awkward. What's wrong with that person? You know, after the interview, you're having that conversation in your round table, and you're like, that didn't go very well for me. That person didn't answer this question right, or that didn't make sense. But do you understand why, if you're getting that same response to that same question from several candidates, maybe the problem is you and the way you interview? But we never take a moment to think about the problem being with us. We always think the problem is with the candidate. And that's why I challenge organizations and leaders who are interviewing for certain roles to think about, if you're getting the same response to the same questions from similar candidates, what's the commonality? And then who really needs to make the shift? Who really needs to pivot and make the change? Maybe it's you. And so that's why I think it's important for organizations then to go look for people who are doing it and being successful when it comes to recruiting neurodiverse talent, and trying to take away some of those nuggets to apply to your recruiting process.
That is so powerful because I think, particularly in our industry, in the accounting industry, we tend to like metrics. And I mean, for obvious reasons, we like checklists, we like processes because they work. But people don't fall into nice, neat little buckets.
No.
And though the concern I have, I get this a lot in training sessions, regardless of the area we're talking about. One of the concerns is, oh, so this is another thing we have to worry about? Do we have to worry about all of these things? And I just finished a session this morning. I kept coming back to the example of cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
That if you have a colleague or a candidate who is from a culture where boasting is seen as disrespectful,
Mm-hmm.
and it's best to stay quiet, then it's the same thing you were talking about. I asked a question in an interview, shared a success story. What is a project that you struggled through, but you came out and you did a good job? Tell me about that experience. And the answer is very low key. And you think, yeah, this person doesn't have it, when it just be a cultural difference or a neurodiversity.
Yeah. And even to your point about that, suppose you ask that question to someone who is autistic. So the problem with that is the person with autism is going to be brutally honest with you about what that problem was and how they overcome it. Or they might say, you know what, I've never had that problem. Why? Because they're so analytical, they don't make mistakes. Or, you know, they've been able to achieve a project because it's their sweet spot and they've just gotten it done because they're that great. That might come over as arrogance to you. Well, you know, I've never really had that problem. Immediately in your mind, you think arrogance versus maybe this person is just really great, very good, very analytical, and they're really good at what they do. You don't want to take a moment to think about that, but you want to take a moment to think in the opposite, right? That's where our microaggressions occur. So just kind of like
thinking over here, I'm like, my brain is actually going back to times when I've interviewed people, as well as times when I've been in an interview and it might not have gone the way I expected. And as I reflect back, I wonder if some of it might have been my ADD is showing. Because maybe I was struggling to answer a question. I can imagine exactly the scenario, but for some reason, when I was trying to describe it, it didn't quite come out right and gave a completely different impression.
Yeah. And, you know, it's in all the experiences that I've ever had, either with hiring, going before someone to enter a client coach relationship with, or working in an organization, things that I wish I knew before that I know now, is to have that brief moment before we start the conversation. And I say, well, I just want to be upfront with you, and I want to let you know that I do suffer from ADHD, and this is how it may show up for you in our relationship.
Oh, but then we go back to the challenge that you were talking about earlier. Do I reveal it or do I not? Because if I can see a situation, it goes both ways. The tweet, I could say that to somebody who's about to interview me and they're like, oh, wow, thank you, it was helpful. And they're not judging, there's just new information and context. Or I just lost my shot at the job because they're going to go through the interview. They'll be polite, but at that round table you were talking about, you're like, yeah, we don't want that one.
Exactly. I mean,
the interview.
It's a chance that you take, but that's what I'm saying. The importance of psychological safety and being able to create those safe spaces. And you, as a human being, are able to suss out when a space is safe and when it's not, for the most part. And so in those moments, or make light of it, you know, like I always say, if I'm going for a job interview in the past, I would say, listen, guys, I'm usually accustomed to being on the other side of the table, which is where you're at. I don't always interview the best. And it's not because I'm not great at what I do. It's just because I get very nervous and I get very anxious, no matter what, on this side of the table. So bear with me.
That's a great line everybody should use.
Right?
Everybody write that down.
I'm
We're gonna
used to
be
being on the
interviewing.
other side of the table. I'm not used to being on this side of the table. Just bear with me a minute. But I'm really great at what I do. But how I show up for you right here, right now, is not the sum of me, and I want you to understand that. But that's me, because I know who I am, and I love who I am, and I'm comfortable enough in my skin to declare those things. Everyone is not me, and I totally understand that. And that's why I say you have to determine if the space is safe enough for you to make that declaration. If you don't think the space is safe enough, and like for someone like me, like us with ADHD, like you've gone into an organization for an interview before, Jina, I'm sure you have, and you look around the space and you go, I don't think I'm going to like working here, just by the fact that it's not colorful or vibrant enough.
Okay. It's funny you say that, because when I started in public accounting, I was at Touche Ross. Okay, people. Yeah, I'm that old. And I was an intern when I started. I think I interned for like 9 months. And then when I graduated, they offered me a job. But I was afraid to take that job without exploring other options. And so I interviewed. I had a job offer from PwC. It was Price Waterhouse at the time.
Right.
And I had an offer from Arthur Andersen, which of course isn't around anymore. And the decision I made, so funny you say this, I went to Arthur Andersen because of the office at Price Waterhouse was darker.
Yeah.
The windows were smaller and it wasn't as bright. And because of it, I thought the culture wasn't one I was going to fit into. I never thought about it the way you just described.
Yeah.
And Arthur Andersen was modern, bright, organized in little clusters. I thought it was cool. All right, so I'm looking at the time. Hold on. I want to
talk about that later.
Oh, sorry, I went to the wrong slide. Hold on. There you go. You had suggested this book.
Yes.
Ebook. Let me get the link to the book. I will drop it into the chat. Also, if you download the PDF, you should be able to simply click on the picture of the book and jump out to the website. But I'm going to put it in the chat. I hope that went through. Why this book?
So this is a great question. And I thought this was a great book to introduce to you guys today, because just based on the conversation that we were just starting to have about how places look and feel to people with neurodiversities determines where we work. And what this book talks about is how do you design a neurodiverse workplace? And simple things like the colors that you have in your space, the plants that you have or lack thereof. So for you finance people, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story about an experience that I had many years ago in another organization, another lifetime. So the experience was that when I first worked in the organization, there were no plants. There was and plants give life to space. And so I struggled with trying to get my CFO at the time to agree to taking on a contract with a landscaping company to bring in some plants and maintain the plants around the office. And his thing was like, that's just not in our budget. And the reason why I raised that is because what this book does is it helps you to understand what helps people to work effectively and be creative in their spaces is more than numbers.
Yes.
Right? It's way more than numbers. And so a space that's okay for you, and I know for a lot of finance people, all you think about is numbers. For me, as a people experience professional, all I think about is people and what makes people feel safe and what makes people feel like they are able to create and innovate in a space. And everyone is not the same. Some people need color. This whole open office concept does not work for everyone.
It's starting to backfire, actually.
It's starting to backfire because it doesn't work for everyone. And you're recognizing, especially people with neurodiversities, like on the autism spectrum, that don't like to be so surrounded socially by people.
Or bright lights and
exactly.
Yeah.
And understanding why sometimes we need to change some of the lighting in certain spaces, why some rooms need to be painted in certain colors.
Hold on. First of all, we're getting fired because we haven't asked the third polling question. So let's launch that one because you're giving away the answer.
Sorry.
Right, let's do the third polling question.
Poll number 3 is up and running.
Yes.
So would you be willing to support? Julie, we keep giving away the answer before we ask the question.
I'm sorry.
You be willing to support physical design changes in your organization to facilitate the inclusion of neurodiverse talent? So I'm curious to see what the responses to that are for what you were just saying. I was also thinking about going back to my question earlier. This is another thing we have to worry about. Except this isn't just about neurodiverse talent. These are things that can help everyone as well as neurodiverse talent. So, Julie, what you aren't saying is, let's redesign everything for this one group.
No.
You're saying, let's add the considerations for this group to all the other considerations we're making.
Correct.
Lori, you asked about repeating or sending the name of the author. Check the chat because I did put that in there. So I hope that came through.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a question that Stuart raised about, declaring if it's against HIPAA rules. And like I said, I don't know how. I'm not based in the US. I'm based in Barbados, and I can only speak from the experiences that I've had here and the colleagues that I work with throughout the world. And what I'm saying is, you need to be able to feel safe enough to declare it. I'm not saying you have to declare it. And I'm not saying that organizations should ask you if you have a neurodiversity, because I think in some countries that's completely, I think in most places it should be illegal to ask that. But what I'm saying is that we need to create organizations where we create the psychological safety for people to feel okay with sharing something so important, because living with a neurodiversity is not something that I don't live with from 9 to 5. It's something that I live with 24 hours a day. And I'm showing up in your space, in your organization, more than I am at home. If I'm not working at home, I'm with you, my colleagues, more often than not. To hold that part of myself away is like losing my power. Yeah, because of the shame and the stigma that is attached to it. What I'm saying is, let's create psychologically safe spaces in our organization where people feel okay to declare those things so that they can get the support that they need. Imagine that someone is sitting on your team as a finance professional, holding that away from you. Think about some of the frustrations that you experience right now with some of your team members, whether it's lack of attention to detail, whether it's that they're what seems like scatterbrained to you. Like there are certain signs that are showing up for you in certain members of your team, and you're thinking to yourself, this person just isn't focused. This person just isn't productive. Why? Is it just that the person is lazy? Or could it be that the person is struggling because of their neurodiversity and the conditions that we're asking them to work under? And I'm saying, as leaders, be that open-hearted, heart-centric leader that opens up a space of vulnerability to allow your team member to bring their entire self to work.
Right. This is just another competency for an inclusive leader. So, all right, we have 7 minutes or 6 if we're going to let them do the wrap up at the end.
It was just 30. It was just something 30. How did we?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. We got a rapid fire Q&A, and then we're going to wrap up with the 4th polling question for those of you wondering. Somebody asked about HIPAA. HIPAA is about medical privacy. Some areas of diversity require employees to self-disclose. So employers can ask, and employees can voluntarily provide it, but we can't mandate it. So I think that does answer that question. Is neurodiversity, all right, so these are really quick answers. Is neurodiversity defined in the Americans with Disabilities Act? Oh, wait, you just said United States. You might not be sure of that.
I am not sure. I am not sure, but you can check it and figure it out.
Yeah.
I am not sure.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Somebody said if it weren't for auto reminders, they would have forgotten this webinar. Yeah, I set reminders all the time. That's an ADD thing.
Very important.
So, oh, that was the question you talked about HIPAA. Sorry, I missed it.
Yes. But you answered it as well, yes. But I'm just saying, in terms of declaring a neurodiversity, like, we need to create safe spaces that people feel okay to declare those things,
Right.
because I am neurodiverse all day, every day.
It's funny because you're saying these things and I'm like, well, of course that's true. But until you said it out loud, I hadn't really thought of it. And accommodating, that sounds like we're putting up with, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but accommodating and being,
right? We're being flexible. It's just like we've created hybrid ways of working. For me, someone with a neurodiversity, I focus and work best after 5 p.m. And so, not that I'm not a morning person, but I'm most productive from 5 p.m. till midnight. Like, I could work that. And I've learned that about myself.
I actually know quite a number of people who know very well what time of day they work best, which I find interesting because there are articles upon articles upon articles that talk about if you do these 10 things, you can be more productive. And one of the things they talk about is, doing your work first thing in the morning. And for some of us, that doesn't work.
No.
What you got me thinking about is it sounds kind of like, you know how there are lots of different personalities out there. And we are all just on a spectrum of that. So neurotypical is part of the spectrum of neurodiversity. And so you're just, and I appreciate you sharing today, opened my eyes quite a bit about the spectrum, and that there are strengths, challenges, like any other dimension of diversity.
Yeah.
And this all has to do with simply the wiring of our brains.
Yes, exactly.
It's nothing personal. It is not a deficit. It is not a weakness. It is not a disability.
No, it's just the way that our brains are wired. And like classically for us with ADHD, again, having a conversation with another HR counterpart of mine earlier this week, and we were talking about how do we manage tasks that are difficult, that seem difficult for us. Like, we know are going to take us a couple hours to wrap our minds around it and get it done. And the way that she explained it, which was like a light bulb for me, was like, understand that people with ADHD, our prefrontal cortex doesn't light up from the things that we find hard to do. What happens for a neurotypical person is that they go, oh, this is going to be hard to do, and it may take me a little while, but I'm going to get it done. Someone with ADHD like us goes, no, that's hard to do. I don't think I want to touch it right now. I'm going to wait.
But then when I touch it, to your point, I fall deep into the rabbit hole. So
yeah, I'm not, it doesn't inspire me. I'm not lit up by it because it's not something that I want to do, because I know it's going to take me forever to do it.
I don't know if anybody ever saw that documentary by, oh wow, time to go. I don't know if anybody saw that documentary. So let's open that fourth polling question, and I will share this while that question is open. Amy Schumer has a documentary that she did that follows her pregnancy. And in that documentary, one of the things that they talked about is some of the challenges they had with her in her marital relationship. And as it would turn out, the husband ended up going in and getting diagnosed. He is, in fact, on the autism spectrum. And that awareness changed the dynamic of their relationship. And she's very open about it. And so I just would share that with folks, just understanding, to your point, this is how we are 100% of the time. It's just coping and being accepted and allowed to, that part of us is bringing the whole self to work. Well, we need to bring that to work.
Yeah.
And so, we are literally at the end of the program and risk running over. Julie, thank you so much. We could have talked about this for 10 more hours.
True.
You have her contact information. Feel free to reach out on her website, her email. She's on LinkedIn. So you can ask questions that you missed.
Let's connect on LinkedIn for sure. I'm more responsive on LinkedIn than anywhere else.
Well, thank you. And so with that, Autumn, we could have kept going, but we have to give it back to you to wrap us up.
Oh, I know. I just wanted the conversation to keep going. I learned a lot today, and I appreciate everyone sharing their stories with us. Wanted to let everyone know that the handouts, archive of the webinar, and your credit will be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours. And if you look in your email inbox, you will find the evaluation link for this webinar. All questions asked today will be forwarded in a full report to our presenters as well. Again, thanks so much, Jina and Julie, for your great content, and to our members for your participation. Please check the schedule on our website for additional information, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.